Okay, so before we start adding the texture to our actual chicken drawing, I wanted to go over how you're going to be doing that, or how you can do that um, with your with uh, different types of shading. Okay, you guys probably have done some version of this, but now I'm going to be explaining exactly how it's going to be working uh, with this drawing specifically. Okay, so to create the texture of the feathers, you need to apply soft shadows underneath them. Right, when something like if I showed you guys this example before, it's like this, right? If my head is blocking the light from hitting the back of my hand, there's a shadow here, right, behind my head. But there's different kinds of shadow, right? So if you have something that's like um, very straight, and the edge is very straight, right? Like my hand. Let me see if I can get a good angle. So you see how the shadow is kind of soft around the outside, but then closer, like that, right? It's kind of soft around it, but it's pretty hard compared to like if I move my hand away. You see how the this shadow is now like softer around the sides in comparison to when it was close like this, right? So the same thing is going to happen with these feathers. So feathers have like a kind of a soft edge around the outside of them, which is why they would create a soft shadow as well. All right. In comparison to like let's say a leaf, right? A leaf is very stiff. It doesn't really have that softness to the outside of the shape. So it's going to create a hard shadow in comparison to a feather, which is going to have a soft shadow, right? We're trying to make it look like a soft texture, not a like really rough texture, right? If we were drawing a tree or something like that, even though these two shapes, these two like feather slash leaf shapes are very similar, um, they feel different because the shadows underneath them are different, right? So the shadow is gonna add to that idea of like, okay, is this gonna be soft or is this gonna be like rough or hard to the touch? All right. So to create a soft shadow, you're going to create something called a gradient. All right, and a gradient is basically a transition from one value to another. Right. So if you want to go from like gray to dark, gray to black, white to black, gray to white, whatever, right? That's going to be a gradient, except rather than just having like a stark contrast, where let's say like here's my box, right? Here's a box where there's no gradient, right? Technically, this is shading, a form of shading, but compare that to let's say this. Okay, so I have dark here, and I slowly get lighter. Okay, you see the difference there, right? One is definitely going to look softer than the other. And to do this, you actually, I like to push down hard. And then as I move to the other side of whatever I'm trying to shade, I start to pick up my pencil and it gets lighter, right? The harder you push down on your pencil, the darker it gets. So the opposite is true as well. The less pressure you apply, the lighter it is. Okay, so you might want to actually do some practice with making gradients on like a separate piece of paper before just jumping into it. And then once you get the hang of being able to do it with control, right? Like I can even, let me show you here. I can even curve my gradient, right? It doesn't have to just be like a flat, straight line. It could be curved as well, right? This is probably one of the harder things for people that haven't really practiced drawing because they don't really have that dexterity and that control with their pencil just yet. But by doing this, you control, sorry, by having a gradient, you control the texture of how something feels, right? If if you look at like a cartoon, right, they generally don't have textures because it's harder, right? It's harder to translate. Um, it's hard. Sorry, it's harder to simplify than like in a more realistic looking drawing. Okay, so underneath the feathers, I'm not gonna just be creating these kinds of shadows, these hard shadows. I'm gonna be more focused on creating these kinds of shadows, which are soft shadows using gradients.